Virginia's primaries grabbed national attention since the state is considered a bellwether on voter trends leading up to the presidential elections. What are the biggest takeaways from the primaries, and how do the results impact ongoing state battles over life and parental rights? Welcome to Speak Up Virginia, equipping you to speak up on the life, family, and freedom issues that matter most to you. From the Family Foundation, I'm your host, Candi with our special guest, Bruce Schlesman. Well, we have a very interesting show for you today. We are going to be dissecting the results of the primaries from last week in Virginia and talk about what those outcomes mean on the issues that we really care about, that Christians are concerned about when it comes to parental rights and the life and the religious freedom issues. And to help us break it all down today, we have an awesome guest with us, Bruce Schlesman. I got the name right this time, right? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Bruce is the executive director of the Family Foundation Action, which is a sister organization to the Family Foundation. And we're going to talk about that soon, what the Family Foundation Action does. But before we get into it, we do have another flat hammer update. Now, Victoria has been calling this slammer hammer. She's kind of dubbed it slammer hammer. So I think we'll just go with that moving ahead. And we have a picture we're going to put up for our YouTube viewers. And you can see Victoria there with her son, and they're in front of what looks like a London Tower clock or something like that. And I got kind of excited when I first saw it and thought she was in London, but no, it's just Busch Gardens.
Have you been to Busch Gardens?
I have not. I have not made that trip yet.
It's kind of a Virginia rite of passage. It's it's kind of our Epcot.
Really?
Yeah, so it's got little Europe areas in each part.
What's the most exotic country there?
Probably. It's like Germany, France, Scotland, England. There's one more. Can't remember what the last one is.
All right,
but there's one more.
Well, you want to give me one tip for surviving Busch Gardens?
I don't know about tip. It's pretty family friendly. It's pretty typical amusement park. But yeah, you should check it out.
All right, we'll do this Virginia rite of passage, apparently. All right, well, let's get back to introducing you, Bruce, because this is your first time on the podcast. Tell us about Family Foundation Action and what you do there every day.
Thank you for having me. And Family Foundation Action is a 501c4 sister organization of Family Foundation. So we're dedicated towards promoting conservative and pro-family values at the ballot box by helping turn out conservative and evangelical voters that are lower propensity, meaning they don't vote every year, and trying to get them to go out and vote for conservative candidates that are going to support our issues.
Well, the action team has knocked on literally hundreds of thousands of doors and equipped voters over the years across the Commonwealth. So I'm excited that you're taking on this role to expand those efforts. Tell us a little bit about kind of how you're going to expand what's already been done.
So one is raising money so that we can expand our operations financially, but also just more doors, more phone banking, more peer-to-peer text messaging in these key battleground areas, and kind of expanding our grassroots presence in those areas to continue to build kind of a machine that is motivating voters year in, year out.
Yeah.
Not shutting off and starting up and starting down.
That's going to be awesome. And you bring really impressive experience to the table on all that. I just want to mention a few things. You mentioned fundraising. You have tremendous experience as a fundraiser for both candidates and nonprofit organizations. It's interesting that you worked on Ed Gillespie's campaign for governor and also managed Don McGuire's campaign delegate race in 2019. And you worked on communications for Judicial Watch and specifically hosted their digital television channel. So that's all great things I think we're going to benefit from. So it's great to have you on board, Bruce.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. And I interned in the Family Foundation when I was in college in 2013.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so, it's nice to be back. I knew a few people before I came on board, but, obviously settling in, and it's good to be back.
All right. Well, I think we got to mention a few other really important facts about you, including the fact that you happen to be a huge Philadelphia Eagles fan. And I know that that might make you some enemies on this show, but we have to mention it. For our YouTube viewers, we are flashing up a picture of Bruce sporting some of that paraphernalia. Any comment on that, Bruce?
I think that's the picture from the Commanders game last year where we blew them out like 31-7.
Okay,
so
that's not going to help with Friends for you, maybe. All right, well, just to get some, a redeeming fact to kind of balance that out, Bruce and his wife also have this adorable beagle named Baxter, and we're going to flash a picture up of Baxter for our YouTube viewers. Now, Bruce, I have to say, he's kind of giving you the side eye there.
No, he was not happy to be wearing the jersey. He doesn't like wearing clothes, so
You made him wear the Eagles jersey?
I did, just for the picture.
I don't know. It might also be that you're trying to hug him, and I don't know, maybe he's...
Yeah, he's very tolerant, but he does have his limits.
All right, well, we've got a lot to dive into today to really look at the outcomes from the Virginia primaries last week. And as we mentioned, this is really interesting because Virginia is considered a bellwether and was watched closely by the rest of the nation because it's considered a good place to look just to tap into what the mood of voters might be leading up to the presidential elections that we're all gearing up for. And one reason that's the case in Virginia is because we're one of these states that has elections every year, and we actually have a big election that with the General Assembly, with every seat being up for grabs coming this November, leading into the presidential elections. And that's why, you have more national attention than is usual for our primaries. So with that backdrop given, Bruce, what are some major takeaways that you had from the outcomes this time around?
So, few things. The first one being the more obvious one the media is talking about is Junkin's endorsement is powerful. He went 10 for 10 in the contested primaries he endorsed in. And a few notable ones was Senate District 27, where his candidate, Delegate Tara Durant, won.
Mm-hmm.
She's a 100%er with the Family Foundation.
Where's that area in general?
That's Fredericksburg.
Okay.
So that's Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, Stafford area. And then Senate District 17, Delegate Emily Brewer won her contested primary in what will be a battleground district. Then that's South Side, so district runs along the Virginia border from pretty much Petersburg to Suffolk.
Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that race, but I do think it's interesting that fact that you called out there that Junkin was 10 for 10 was noted by national media on both sides of the political spectrum. So we had this headline from CNN that we're going to flash on the screen for YouTube viewers. It says, "Results from Virginia's primaries set up test of Junkin's influence." And then you also had a Fox News interview the day after with Governor Junkin. And of course, the question came up again whether he was going to run for president. And let's just hear his response.
Based on those timelines, are you still considering whether you would run for president?
Well, I have been continually humbled by the fact that someone as new to this as I am is having his name tossed around and included in this discussion. 40 years ago, I was washing trash and taking out trash and washing dishes at a diner in Virginia Beach. And what I'm finding, of course, is that this discussion, I believe, is really reflective of the great progress that we're making in Virginia. As I said, this was a state that was led by Democrats on all fronts, and the state was really heading so much in the wrong direction. And in 17 short months, we have fundamentally redirected things with strong economic growth and standing up for law enforcement and making sure that we're empowering parents and reestablishing excellence in education. And so our focus is on our elections this year. We've got our midterms, and we're off cycle. And so I've got 100 House seats and 40 Senate seats that are up this year. I want to hold our House. I want to flip our Senate. And I believe Virginians will do that.
Well, as you can tell, he's gotten a lot more used to answering that question. But he also touched on what I think a lot of our viewers, Bruce, might be wondering, and that is, how did these outcomes of the primary impact this power struggle that we see happening right now in the General Assembly, the power struggle for control, because we have a very narrowly divided Senate. Right now, the House is in the Republican hands. And, at the Family Foundation, we're not concerned about the power struggle. We're concerned about how the outcome of that affects the issues we care about, like parental rights, like whether we're going to protect babies in the womb. So what do you think about, what did I'm saying midterms, but the primaries tell us about that power struggle?
So on the Democrat side of things, they rejected their more moderate candidates and went with more far left extremist candidates that are going to champion a lot of issues we're diametrically opposed to. And they made it very clear how they're going to behave in this General Assembly, and it's going to look more radical than when they killed every pro-family bill in the Senate. They've made it clear that they're striving for an even more radical approach to that. And so, it's concerning. The Democrats have really painted themselves as more to the left of where they were last year.
So we saw even more radicals gaining influence on the Democrat side, pushing it more extreme that way. How does that impact whether we might be able to hold pro-life, pro-family values in the House and maybe gain more in the Senate? I mean, is there any good news here on that front?
So the good news is this does help conservatives successfully paint them in these upcoming general election as the more radical, extreme, out of touch,
or not even
Virginian
paint, but just
families.
reveal this is who they are.
Yeah. And so that's going to help. They're going to say things that are going to be not what the majority of Virginians want, and those statements will be featured in Spirit of Virginia PAC ads across the state. Those statements are going to be featured in candidate ads up and down the ballot. So I think it ultimately helps conservatives more show Democrats how extreme and out of touch a lot of these Democrat candidates are. So I think it ultimately helps conservatives. I also think the conservatives picked the best candidates they had. I think the candidates with the strongest chance of winning in November ultimately won in several of these primaries.
So when you consider that it was just 9 members of 9 left-leaning members of the Senate Education and Health Committee that killed almost all of the major pro-life and parental rights bills, do you feel like that we have any chance of changing that kind of dynamic, or the pro-family majority in the Senate? Do we have a chance of that? Do you think it's going to be hard? What's your thought on that?
I think our chances of winning the state Senate after these primaries, from what I've seen in these races, increased. Why
do you think it increased?
I think it increased because they chose weaker candidates and the Republicans and conservatives chose stronger candidates.
Okay. And again, from a pro-family perspective, we're looking at the chance of getting our bills through. And in that regard, you're saying we have a chance, a good chance.
Yes.
It's not even slim. It could be a good chance.
Yes. So I still think they might be favored in November, but ultimately I think the chances of our pro-family agenda being passed and parental rights being passed and all these things we want being passed comes from conservatives taking power in the Senate. If we don't win the Senate, then that isn't going to happen. And so I think our chances increased in that regard. Now, the chances of if the Democrats take power, I do think it's going to be worse than it was last year, because now all of their moderates are gone and they've been replaced by more leftist, out of touch extremists that are going to behave as such if they on these committees, and many of them will be appointed to these key committees like education and health.
I mean, when you had people like Senator Lucas saying outright they were going to throw away every pro-life bill, so that's
the brick wall.
That could. I don't know how you get worse from that though, from the life issue. Right.
I think they're going to try. We'll see.
Yeah.
They lost what was left of their moderates, or even just their more left-leaning. There were several close calls. There were several places where they had incumbents almost lose, barely hold on, like Cray Deeds, to much more left-leaning opponents. And then you had Louise Lucas versus Sprole, and we're going to get to that in a bit. But, Sprole was an incumbent. He lost to Louise Lucas, who ran very much to the left of him and has been bragging about stopping every she had a video of her shredding conservative bills in the shredder.
That's what I mentioned, the pro-life bills.
Gleefully laughing about it. So, those are who the Democrats have chosen to represent them.
Well, Planned Parenthood did not hesitate to crow over this. Here's a statement from Planned Parenthood, Advocates of Virginia, boasting that Delegate Aird in particular will, quote, secure a pro-abortion rights majority in the Virginia State Senate and stop abortion bans from coming to Virginia. And for our YouTube viewers, we've got that image up there on the screen where you can see that statement. You know, they're assuming she's going to win the General Assembly race. But I think a lot of leftists are trying to use political races like these to make the point that the pro-life viewpoint is on the losing side. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Bruce.
It's not. It's just they have done a good job of framing it as such in the national media. And on top of that, they got some good results out of the midterms. The lessons they learned from the midterms, which were the wrong lessons, is they can make every single race about abortion. And that's what they're going to try to do.
Well, what's the encouragement? What would you say to people about why not to believe that if you have a pro-life viewpoint and you dare to articulate it?
So the issue is nuanced. I think the majority of people support reasonable limits on abortion. The majority of people support...
Yeah, the polls show that.
Yeah, the polls show the majority of Americans and Virginians support 15-week abortion ban. You know, there are several states, and including swing states, that support even more bigger bans or more limits. The majority of people do not want the Democrat policy of any abortion all the time for any reason. Majority of people don't want that.
All right. Well, as they say, a lot of times to look at the trends and what's behind this, you have to follow the money. Tell us what you saw with that trend if you were to follow the money.
So as a fundraiser, you know, that's my emphasis on from campaign background was raising money. It's just so important in politics. And so these Democrats, so many of them were funded by far left groups, a lot of out-of-state groups and big in-state groups of Democrat billionaires like George Soros, like Bills, like Planned Parenthood, like unions, like Clean Virginia, and so on and so forth, poured millions of dollars into these Democrat primaries. On TV alone, the Democrats spent $6.2 million in the primaries. Wow. Compared to a Republican spending of less than $1 million.
What do we know about like the Planned Parenthood and
so La Charisse Aird, former delegate Aird, received $400,000 from Planned Parenthood, and she received over $1 million in total from several other corporations, PACs, unions, and outside groups, all with an incredibly leftist tint.
Okay. Well, I did think it was interesting that we heard that George Soros was funding some of the local attorney races.
Yes, and he did this, and that's been his mission for a while. These attorneys won with his support and money last time, and he backed them to the hilt again, and we had Toscano win in Fairfax against a close contested primary. Fortunately, the opponent was not well funded. It spent 10 to 1, something extreme. Toscano won with 55% of the vote. Exact same story with Buda Bubarej, who also won with Soros money and outspent her opponent about 10 to 1. 154 to 46, I think, was the final count. This is an attorney who's destroyed her county with pro-crime policies that are hurting her people and the people she's supposed to represent. I mean, she's isn't even allowed to take cases before judges because of the lack of credibility she has with the courts. She can't even do her job.
Well, is there any good news on the attorney front with the races?
Yes, there is a credible challenger, at least in Loudoun, who is a former Commonwealth attorney of the area. He's very moderate, but he's going to support police and he's going to actually do the job that a Commonwealth's attorney is supposed to do. He's going to be running as the Republican nominee, and that's going to be a close race. There's a world where the Republican actually wins in Loudoun because of how extreme Buda has been and how unhappy so many of the residents are with the job she's doing.
Well, isn't she the one that took a picture with the Loudoun Love Warriors?
Yes, and for our viewers, if you don't remember, Loudoun Love Warriors were the group doxing parents and issuing death threats, and several members of the group were in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office,
or had associations there at least.
Yes,
yeah.
and staffers of local Democrat candidates and local activists.
And so she took a picture like during the campaign or what?
No, she invited them to her victory party to take a picture with them.
That says something.
Yes.
Yeah, that's disturbing. Well, let's just take this time to take a little bit closer dive into some of the races. I'd love for you to just highlight a few of them. There was a lot of attention, for example, on senators that got ousted, shall we say.
Yes.
Let's just start with the three-way race between Amanda Chase, Glenn Sturdivant, and Ramirez. What was her first name? Tina Ramirez. And this was in Senate District 12. That's kind of the Midlothian, Chesterfield County area, right?
Yeah.
Okay. This is the question I want to ask you on that one, because it was kind of a big upset with Glenn Sturdivant beating out an incumbent. And a lot of media were trying to take this and say that this is further evidence. This is another example of a Trump candidate, losing out, that Trump candidates aren't doing that well. And to be fair, she did call herself Trump in heels. Another example of, shall we say, more colorful, exuberant personalities not doing so well. What's your take on all that?
So it didn't come down to policy. I mean, Amanda Chase, great voter, 100% voting record with Family Foundation. This was about her personality and a lot of local battles and infighting on the ground. I wouldn't even call her the favorite. She was outspent massively by Sturdivant, who had a lot of funding from different groups and parties in Richmond. He had the majority of the Senate caucus endorsing for him and fighting many of Chase's colleagues. He had all of the local electeds endorsing him, or the majority, including Sheriff Carl Leonard, who is a little bit of a superpower in Chesterfield. His endorsement carries some serious weight. And then he had Attorney General Jason Miyares and Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears. So there was a lot of forces that rallied to try and get Sturdivant over the line. And I think that's what it came down to. I mean, Senator Chase has a dedicated amount of supporters that stuck with her. This was a very close race, but she was outspent, and money matters in politics.
And she was a 100%er on all of the Family Foundation issues as far as live parental rights and that kind of thing. But in this case, it just came down to some of those more perceived personality issues, is what you're saying, right?
Yes. And, she decaucused from the Republican caucus as over an issue with the minority leader, Norman, who's gone now. He's retiring.
Let me ask you this. Do you agree, though, with that analysis that this was part of a bigger national trend with Trump candidates and stuff? Or do you think
regional.
This is entirely localized?
Entirely localized. It didn't have anything to do with her stance on Trump or her viewpoints. There were many conservative candidates that won across the state. This was a regional thing.
All right, interesting. Well, I definitely want to hear you get more into this race that you already mentioned on Joe Morrissey. I want to make sure I'm saying his last name right.
Yeah, Morrissey. Yeah, you got it.
And Delegate Arid. Anything else you want to call attention to on that one?
Yeah, so it kind of ended in a bloodbath, which it was expected to be much, much closer, and that just came down to Arid had, I think, 1.8 mil was what was spent in that race. It was a lot of money. And so it came down to just outspending. Morrissey had a lot of personal scandals. He was getting a very public divorce with his wife again, and had multiple affairs.
Allegedly, we should probably say, but go
allegedly, yeah, alleged affairs. His divorce was being litigated in the public, and she was writing stories about it, and so he was being dragged through the mud there. And then on top of that, every Democrat in Richmond came in to help. I mean, every elected official they had pretty much endorsed Arid, came in to help try to get Arid over the line, and then they spent just an absurd amount of money. Planned Parenthood spent a ton of money, all to unseat Joe Morrissey. And so, and it did come down that he made it about abortion. He says he's pro-life. A lot of times when that votes come, he hasn't voted pro-life, but he often claims he's pro-life and ran as a pro-life Democrat.
Or at least seemed open to negotiating on some of these, like the 15-week bill maybe seemed a little bit more open.
Yeah, I mean, at one point he called his opponent, said she was guilty of infanticide. So this was a nasty race in which Arid made it about abortion, and it worked because it's a Democrat primary.
Okay. All right. Good analysis. Let's talk about another fascinating Senate race, and that's the one between the veteran senators, Lucas and Sprole.
Yeah, so Lionel Sprole and Senate Majority Leader Luis Lucas are both incumbents. They were drawn into the same district. This is one of several districts where incumbents were drawn in against each other. And most of them, they kind of settled their differences off the battlefield, and one ran and one didn't. In this case, they both ran. Louise Lucas ran aggressively to the left, and it worked. It's a Democrat
I think I saw a
primary.
picture of her with boxing gloves on, so it was aggressive.
Yeah, she did a whole ad about her in boxing gloves, like fighting the Junkin agenda, fighting the extremist MAGA Republicans. That's the way she framed it. And Lionel Sprole ran as, I'm just going to do the job. I'm not here for glory. And unfortunately, the Democrats felt they wanted someone who was going to fight Republicans aggressively.
Gets back to what you were saying earlier, more radical.
Yeah, no, the more radical member was chosen here, who dubbed the state Senate killing every good bill the, quote, brick wall.
And that's kind of the Chesapeake Hampton Roads area, is that right?
Portsmouth, it's in Hampton Roads. It's kind of Portsmouth, the city of Portsmouth and the surrounding area.
Well, I thought it was sad in one sense on the pro-family issues because Senator Sprole was one of the only Democrats, as far as I understand, that supported adding religious freedom protections to the Virginia Values Act. And some of our listeners may remember that this was a sweeping act that passed that pretty much threatens the religious freedoms of churches and Christian organizations to be able to operate according to their biblical values on sexuality. Right now, because of this sweeping act, they could be threatened any day if they chose to take a stance on that in certain situations. They don't have protections there because of this act. And he tried to speak up for putting those protections back in because he was hearing from local churches. So it's kind of sad that someone that was at least listening to local churches, that's another example of maybe losing more of what might be these days considered more moderate,
I mean, on that one issue he does have a pretty Democrat voting record, but he was viewed as a more reasonable Democrat that even if you disagreed with him, you could talk to him about it. And it was disappointing to see Democrat voters pivot so aggressively to the left in every case. That was a trend we saw across the board.
Well, another thing I want to talk to you about is a swing district. There were several swing districts that you were tracking, but for the sake of time, we're just going to highlight one of those, even though I know Bruce could share a whole lot more. But one of those was Senate District 17, and that's the one you briefly mentioned earlier, I think, with Republican Emily Brewer winning her race. Tell us about that.
So Delegate Emily Brewer is 100%er with the Family Foundation. She's very conservative. Both candidates were.
And I'm sorry, we should say real quick with 100%er what we mean with the report card.
Yes. So it's a Family Foundation action report card we do every year that we track how people vote in the General Assembly and score them. And when I say 100%, that means they voted 100% with the issues and the bills we were tracking, which are all pro-family, pro-biblical values, conservative bills.
Yeah. All right. So continuing your analysis, she was 100%er.
She was, and she ran against conservative outsider Hermie Sadler, who is a former NASCAR driver, local business owner from Emporia, which is counted for about 1% of the population of the district, very rural. She was a business owner too. Her businesses are headquartered in Suffolk, which is the kind of heartbeat of this district. It's where the majority of the population sits. And so she was a known entity. She was well liked by the population. She'd represented them well as a delegate. So it really came down to name ID. She was outspent by Hermie, who self-funded, but at the end of the day, it just came down to name ID. She was a known entity, and both candidates were conservative here.
Now, why is this district considered one of the swing districts?
So this district, Junkin won by 3 or 4 points. Until that point, this was a historically Democrat district because it has a large rural black population. And so that community recently started moving more Republican and voting more conservative. Like, I think Junkin and Delegate Otto Waxman, who is in this area a bit, he won, I think, about a third of black voters, and Junkin won a similar margin with rural black voters in this district specifically, not statewide. I should make that caveat. So this is a district that will determine control of the state Senate. It's rated by VPAP as a lean R, meaning it leans slightly Republican. It really isn't. It's a swing district because until that, Junkin was the first Republican statewide to win this district in a very long time. So it's a historically Democrat district that recently started flipping Republican.
Okay, so it could come down to this district. how many, we won't go into all of them, but how many swing districts are there?
I would say 4.
Okay.
And so this is one of them. This is one of the more Republican swing districts.
Okay.
There are a few that aren't as friendly to us.
Okay, interesting. Friendly to our, maybe getting some 100%ers on the life, family, and freedom issues.
Yeah.
Bruce, I think I want to pick your brain on some other takeaways. Like, what was the biggest surprise for you?
The biggest surprise, Amanda Chase surprised me a little bit. I thought, despite the money and despite kind of the huge push from some Republicans, I thought she was going to pull it out. That was a surprise to me. The biggest surprise was the Democrats losing 4 incumbents, possibly more, and so. That was a huge surprise. I mean, that's the first time that's happened in decades in the state. I think it's the most incumbents total that have ever been lost since 1990.
And that's because of this redistricting that they did?
Partly because of redistricting. That did make some of their incumbents more vulnerable with these new areas and that were deep blue areas that had a lot of more radical voters in it. That is true. But it also came down to the Democrats decided they wanted to embrace candidates with more extreme positions.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, let's end on an encouraging note. What was the most encouraging trend, or a few of those that you saw out of this?
The most encouraging trend was Junkin's endorsement being powerful. That'll matter in November. He's still popular overwhelmingly with most voters, including independents, especially independents. That'll matter when the chips are down in November. But the biggest encouragement I took was I think our odds of taking the state Senate improved.
Okay.
I love the candidates we got.
For Christians that aren't necessarily concerned, let's say you're a Christian, you don't care about, you care about it, but you're not looking at Democrat, Republican so much as your Christian values. Why should those things be concerning or encouraging to them?
I think that the candidates we got specifically will fight more strongly for pro-family values, and I think our odds of getting a more pro-family conservative state Senate rest on these candidates. And if we're going to affect change in Virginia, we need the conservatives to take control of the state Senate, and I think our odds went up of that happening.
Our odds of the continued frustration of parents fighting hard for parental rights bills only to see them thrown in the trash would hopefully decrease.
And I'm seeing a lot of candidates openly running on school choice, on parental rights.
That was encouraging.
It seems to be the banner that a lot of conservatives all across the state, key districts or just red districts, are running on.
That's worth mentioning. The parental rights banner definitely continued. And, do you feel like Christy Newcraig, hopefully got her last name correct,
Yes.
Christy Newcraig, do you feel like she was part of that parental rights wave?
Absolutely. Absolutely. She's going to be one of the biggest fighters for parental rights in the state Senate.
Where was that area?
It's Chesapeake.
That was another kind of upset that we didn't talk about, but
I wouldn't say upset, but that was a very, very swing primary where there were 3 candidates that all had a really good shot of winning, and she won in a very close primary.
Because she was a strong parental rights school board candidate,
Yes.
is how I'm kind of familiar with her.
Very much so. And
all right.
we expect her to vote that way in the state Senate.
All right. Well, let's just wind up by talking about how people can get involved. Everyone's got an eye toward the November election coming up, or as we mentioned, every single seat in the House and Senate is going to be up for grabs. And if you want to find out how your candidate stands on life, family, and freedom issues, or how you can get involved with candidates that you feel like reflect your values, what can they do, Bruce? How do they get plugged in with your team to try to get educated on the candidates and figure out how they can support candidates that they feel like support their values?
So, a lot of ways. Door knocking, phone banking, we're going to need a lot of volunteers for. We have 2 volunteer trainings coming up. June 28th, we're having one in the Hampton Roads area, and we're sending out emails about that. And then June 29th, we have the Richmond area volunteer training that'll be at the office. And so those are 2 ways to get involved, to start helping us with knocking doors, phone banking, promoting these pro-family values and candidates at the doors, and getting voters who believe that way to go out and express their civic duty, because ultimately at the end of the day, we need voters to show up. I think they're out there. I think if all of our people showed up, we're going to be successful in November.
So a lot of the help people can do is just voter education and reminding them to vote. We've got the report card that's already out there. You can go on the website, familyfoundation.org, and just look for the report card banner. There's a voter guide that'll be coming out soon.
Yes, there'll be a few voter guides in all of these districts kind of showing where all the candidates stand on the issues.
Okay, those will be from Action. So just tell them how to get to the Action website.
So familyfoundation.org /action. There's a tab on the website for action. Just click on that, and that's how you get to the action website.
All right, familyfoundation.org/action. Is that right? Okay. All right, well, thanks everybody for joining us. Bruce, thanks for doing such a great job walking us through that. Obviously, you're a wealth of information. I'm sorry we don't have more time to go, pick your brain even more, but I'm sure we'll be doing this again after another election. So
thanks for having me.
Yeah. Don't forget, everyone, to let people know about the Speak Up Virginia podcast. Share that YouTube playlist, Speak Up Virginia playlist. And if you're listening through the audio version, be sure to give us a review if you enjoy what you hear to help us reach more people on Spotify and Apple and platforms like that. So thanks again, everybody. Remember, we are stronger when we speak together.